So we're here with Mark Kashman. Can you please tell me a bit about your role within the SharePoint team?
Yeah, so I'm on the marketing side of things, and I typically have been involved with everything that we're doing with SharePoint in the cloud. Certainly that's always been called SharePoint Online, but now it kind of spans SharePoint, what we're doing with other apps like Microsoft Teams, Yammer, what we do with sharing in a lot of different ways. But typically SharePoint Online, what we're doing with SharePoint in Office 365, and mostly thinking in terms of technical marketing, getting the word out. I get to do some of our bigger announcements, and I feel a lot of questions and a lot of feedback, so always, of course, keep that coming.
Absolutely. What were the core topics that have been announced here at the conference?
Yeah, so in my little sphere of what I focus on, obviously we announced a lot about SharePoint, and you can go read, and there's a ton of blogs about everything that we announced. But in my area, we talked about some of the new innovations coming to communication sites, what we're doing with team sites. A lot of those are integration points with things like Microsoft Teams and Planner. And then with communication sites, one other area that's a little bit more specific is what we're doing with what we call organizational news. So we started with team news, and now we're bringing sort of that top level down, which has some additional capabilities. So the news service just is getting extended. And if you think about what you can do with approving news before it gets published, scheduling news, workflows that maybe the news needs to go to, and then the last part of that is just to be able to audience target who you want the news to actually go to. Not everybody, or maybe everybody.
So that's basically a modern page management.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And actually, you just reminded me, within that we also introduced metadata for pages.
Yes, tagging a page.
Yeah, you can have more experiences based on the metadata. So you can create views on pages, or if you create a workflow that is only going to be picking up certain pages with certain metadata, you can create some really nice smart workflows to automate the flow.
You can do topic pages and just capturing pages which are tagged with a particular keyword for knowledge management kind of things.
We hope it makes it better for people to be able to visually organize, and to also ensure that if you tag something, it'll appear in the right place without having to go and put it in all the places that you need to. At the page level, we certainly support metadata for lists, for libraries, for everything, but for pages and now especially news, that's been one area that people have been asking about, and it's really nice to hear. So far, people are interested in what we're doing. They've seen it in demo and kind of can't wait for people to get it actually in their hands and using it.
What I saw in the demo is that the keywords are actually also shown in the page. So, yeah.
So it's sort of like a new web part. I don't want to say the word tag cloud because that's not at all what it is. But some of it's just visibility. You know, if you think about it from like an SEO perspective, there is, of course, you're going to influence the page and what happens to it. But sometimes people just want to know, what is this page related to? And if I were to think about it as the intranet, or is it something that might be more internal sites, or however you describe content, especially if it's a little bit more structured, it'll come through and be visible.
Okay.
So
now that we're being specific, one more question, the audience targeting. Can I then, if I use that, can I use like Office 365 groups to would that be the normal thing to do?
Yeah, so however you organize, kind of what I wouldn't say too unstructured, but something that it's driven by somebody, the end user. You can create an Office 365 group and certainly put whoever you want into that group. And that could be additionally managed and overseen by IT if that needs to be. And once those groups are set, then those are objects that can be applied to pages, as much as they can be applied to the entire site. And of course you could have multiple groups, not nested, but side by side, where this page needs to go to these three groups that have been pretty well defined. And if you think about the sort of extreme of that is, if you have that context of a dynamic group, based on what your role is, what your region is, if you set up things like that, then anybody who joins the company who meets that criteria will be a part of that group, but then could be a way to define who can access that page.
That's very, very useful, especially for knowledge management and consumption of specific data. And if it always helps when that's automatically visible for you as a user.
That's right.
And it just, when you go to a specific page, you see what's important for you, which really helps.
Yeah, we want it to be a more personalized experience. That's for the end user. And we also want it to be a more governable, but not with hard, IT chains that people feel like is on top of them. You can manage it before, you can manage it after, and of course, in the dynamic nature, if you set it up right, things will just go to the right people with the right set of criteria, and then
makes sense.
Once you set it up, it'll adhere to that.
Yeah, great stuff. That will really, really improve this experience.
We hope so, and it's really just a matter of time for us to have gotten to it. But I think uniquely, we started at the team news level, so that's been out for a while, and the same technology is behind how you create your pages, where you put your pages. You can now assign better where you put your news that's going to be more for all company, in this new organizational news. But you can still keep news that's just to your team. Like if you attended the conference here and maybe sent a note back to the team with some pictures from the keynote and some highlights. That goes back to the team. That doesn't necessarily need to go to the whole company. But if you have your own conference, here's what we announced last week at our own conference. That might go to everybody at the company as an update. So you'll have those two things to play with. And to the end user, it aggregates in their SharePoint mobile app, the news tab, and in their SharePoint home. That top news is all the news around you. And of course, organizational news will sort of pop for everybody. Team news will flow up based on the teams that you're active in.
So the organization news is like the official channel where corporate communications or HR or can put the messaging, and depending on which groups I'm part of, I can see the other data there and read it and consume it.
Exactly.
True.
So at the other side of things, we obviously have announced hub sites that have just rolled into production within this last month. And a couple things that we talked about here that are coming new for hub sites are what happens when a site is associated under a hub. First of all, we'll have approval. So if you are the hub site owner, and you're controlling essentially who can be a part of this family of sites. I
can say as a site collection owner, I can say I want to connect to this hub site, but I have to wait for approval from the owner of the hub who managed that. It's an admin role, I think. And it's like a flow approval?
It's a real simple flow, but you can also create a custom flow off of it. So if you wanted it to be just a simple approval, literally an email with a button, it says that easy. But if you wanted to go through a round of approval, maybe there has to be a meeting scheduled to have some training and some guidance on what you do when you join this.
You can have like an onboarding script.
Exactly. It's exactly what it is. As simple as you want your process to be, or as complex as it needs to be, whatever Flow supports. We'll have an out-of-box experience, but if you know Flow, you can go and have a unique flow that's associated to just that hub. You might have 10 hubs, and each of them might have a different flow based on the people. So the other thing that we announced is once a site joins the hub, not only do you get approval for it, but once you get approval, or if you don't have any approval, it just joins, you can also influence what happens to the site itself. So if you wanted to adjust permissions based on some criteria, if you wanted to add some specific list columns or content types, or we wanted to design a layout of the homepage, theme, layout, sections, web part placements.
You can use site script to do that.
That's exactly what it is. So a site design that's associated to a hub would have your specific site script that then runs against that site. Before it shows up for anybody, it maybe has to adhere to some policies or some basic line of a look and feel, or as simple as a theme, which of course we do already. It's that same idea. We run some actions that you define and can change over time. They're not rigid, and but it's based on when a site is associated. It happens right away, so that you don't have to go, oh, shoot, we got to get to that, and then you set it once, and now anytime it happens, it'll be automatic.
That's great. And the same thing applies also for the page management, where you can have like approval of pages.
That's right.
And also have a flow in which you can customize, and depending on your governing structure, depending who needs to approve a certain addition of a page to a library, if it's like organizational news or adding knowledge to like a knowledge environment. You can also automate that and just customize the standardized, like I think a page approval flow, it's going to be named something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's you think of anything you could have done in workflow, and anything that you want to do to govern in the look and feel, to govern the access, to govern the content that is there by default. It's all choices you make, and as long as you have the content and process defined, you just do it. And you had mentioned a question around, is it true for pages? And just sort of a reminder, news and pages are essentially based on the same authoring canvas, the same construct. So really whatever you can do in pages of news applies. The only thing difference with news is when you publish news, it goes out into the news service. So again, it goes to your news tab on your mobile device, it goes into the news of SharePoint Home, and it's just treated a little bit differently. But the tech behind it, page approval,
it's
metadata,
the same. It's just how it aggregates on the top level and in home and in the app.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Clear. So the best thing I like about this, of course, we have page approval in SharePoint to 2010. But we were limited in what we could customize. We could tag people, and then now with Flow we can just make our own scripts, and that's very, very useful. So,
I think we've been trying to be friendly, obviously, more to the types of flows you can create. You don't have to have a PhD in SharePoint to build the workflow. You don't have to go into Visual Studio and publish it up to Azure. Those are still certainly supported, and those aren't going away. But for these kinds of processes that are just at a team level, or even at an org level, but it's really not something you want to spend a lot of time and development on, you can refine it, and you can work on it for a number of days before you get it just right. And if you're new to Flow, there might be a little learning curve. But it's not a challenging technology.
No, there's a lot to learn online. There are a lot of people doing great videos online on how to use it. So it's a great platform. I think that the marriage between SharePoint Online and Flow and Power Apps, and we are also seeing that these are going more. I saw pictures of Power Apps integrated in Pages. That's
wow. The Power Apps web part. That's something that's should be coming pretty soon as far as when it's actually available. But there's a lot of things with Power Apps and Flow. If you think about it, one of the most simple, but I think one of the most powerful things is what the OneDrive team did with Flow. Think about it, OneDrive, I just want to send a document for approval to my manager. Now it's just a one click. You can program it so it is just your manager, or again, you can interrupt the flow and add 2 other people. And if 3 of the people, if you set a rule that says if I at least hear from 2 of the people, then it's good to go and I can publish it. Technically, I could move it to the right place or just say, great, I got a paper trail that says they approved it, now I can go and use
That's
that.
perfect. And since it's so simple, it really moves the workload from email even easier, because people still have to unlearn the way of asking approval on a document or things through email, and nobody likes it to have a push like that. And this is more like, okay, there's some things I need to check, and it's much more manageable. So that's great stuff.
And it's power to the user.
So I've learned that you started a new podcast with Chris McNulty.
So Chris
and I,
it's called the Intrazone, and it's Chris and I've had a couple other co-hosts if you've heard a couple of the shows. But mostly Chris and I are focused on bringing in great content in a timely fashion. We sort of started the Intrazone with the concept of we wanted to be able to target the in-between. So we've got these big moments like the SharePoint Conference in May and Ignite in September. And for the rest of the year, we of course release a lot of technology and we have blogs that go out. But we wanted to hold the conversation in a more weekly or bi-weekly fashion. So we thought podcasts would be a natural way to provide information and consistently get feedback so that we can refine what topics we focus on and what kind of questions we can help answer. So the Intrazone, if you're interested, it's just an easy URL to remember. Take you to the homepage of the show. It's aka.ms/theintrazone, and that's THEINTRAZONE. Or if you just look for me, I'm always mentioning the new shows that we have going out. We did one live here at SPC.
You can find it on iTunes and on the different platforms.
All of the
very easy. Even I found it on Spotify.
Yeah, it's on Spotify.
That's also very easy.
We pumped it out. We wanted to make sure that people, whatever your listening program is, I use Pocket Casts on Android, and it's there. So it shouldn't be too hard to find, and we absolutely appreciate it if people would subscribe, rate and review, let us know what's going on, and of course, provide us feedback, what you want to hear. Every once in a while we put surveys out so that we're making sure we land the right content, and you can assure that we'll be timely, because now it's not just 2 times a year, it's 26 times a year.
Yes, and I can really recommend it. So it's very valuable content just to learn about how building intranets and information management and all the things that are associated with it. So absolutely.
And the last thing too is it's not just Microsoft Voices. So our intent is that we have guests both from inside and outside Microsoft to give, of course, that perspective on SharePoint. And we've got an upcoming episode where we're wanting to bring in the Microsoft Teams team to give their perspective. We always pull in partners. We always have a guest segment where you'll hear a little bit more about how people build on top of SharePoint, what they offer. And sometimes we talk to engineering, sometimes we talk to some of our peers, sometimes there's surprise guests. So
nice.
We try to keep it lively, we try to keep it...
a good mix of topics and insights. That's good. Perfect. So my last question is about bringing content services to the masses. So at our company, Metro, we try. Our focus goal is to include everybody in consuming data and using document management and SharePoint, even if their skills are limited. What we see, there's still a large population of people that are employed but don't get much training on using SharePoint or Office 365, especially in small and medium businesses. What is Microsoft doing to make adopting and using SharePoint in particular easier for a broader audience?
Yeah, I think a lot of it started about 2 years ago when we decided that it was time for SharePoint to be a little bit more friendly to actually use. So you didn't feel like, if you went from using Office, which is pretty user-friendly, people have been using it for years, and if you turned to SharePoint to add a little bit more rigor to where you stored the content, who could access it, how you share it, where you share it from, SharePoint was a little scary. And some of that was just user interface. Some of it was functionality. Some of it was, 3 clicks that you'll never get to.
Exactly.
So some of it was just user experience. Then I think the next move was accessibility. So there's a lot of accessibility in terms of real accessibility, low light, contrast, accessibility to people that have some disabilities and maybe need to access the content, but not necessarily being able to see it, but hear it. So there's a lot of work that the team's been doing to make it so that SharePoint is very accessible. The other side of accessibility is just mobility. If you ever thought about SharePoint on a mobile device in 2013,
that's pretty hard.
It's a little bit, but everything that we've done is actually intended to make it so that you can access content on the go, and that's documents, that's sites, that's news, that's pages. Everything we've talked about up until this point flows into the SharePoint mobile app. So getting people where they are in a smaller device or on a tablet or cross devices certainly has been another job one. But I'd say the last one, just by nature of what you were asking, is then if you're talking real true content management, sometimes it's just meeting the user where they are. If you have something that you attach to an Outlook email and you do it in the old way, you're creating kind of a version management an issue, where you've got one version in the Outlook Exchange environment, you've got the version, maybe it started on your desktop, you moved it into SharePoint, and now you just don't know which is the latest version. So there's that type of integration. We've done a lot of work with Microsoft Teams that from the ground up has been built for end users.
Yes.
It's really easy to use. It's all about discussion and referencing documents, but stored in SharePoint, managed the way that you want them to.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like Flow, like content that we've been talking about, the metadata management, approval, those types of things. When you apply those things, those are not meant for just IT to go and set up for the team. That's meant for people like me. I'm not an IT or a developer. I know my product, but I don't think it's a huge learning curve to be able to protect my content, to share it in a way that is only going to be shared to certain people. And then if I need to move it from the life cycle of early phase ideation to a draft to a thing I'll share with a broader set of people to actually publishing it into something like a communication site for people to then broadly view but not edit, that's really easy to do. And that's pretty basic content management. And if you need to, at some point, maybe something qualifies as a record, we're right there for you, and keep going.
Yeah, so it's important. One of the things that I like very much about last year is that we got like the people cards, which are looking the same everywhere, the way that you share data, the UI from, if you're inside of Office or inside of SharePoint, inside of OneDrive, you get the same uniform experience, which really matters. It's not like so you do the same thing, and then I think that's a big improvement from where we come from.
If you think about the first time that SharePoint and Exchange came together, is a feature that we now have sort of graduated from because of what we do with SharePoint and Exchange in the cloud. But it was called the site mailbox. And the concept was there as you have your mail in Exchange and you have your documents in SharePoint. And to switch between the two, with Outlook you could see the documents, and within SharePoint you could see the conversation. And now if you think about Teams, or if you think about working with Office 365 groups and you're using a shared inbox, they're now pretty married at the hip, and it's a really nice experience. And we've got some kinks to work out still, but the products are starting to blend together where it really is an Office 365 experience. And if I was to really put my Microsoft hat on, it will become a Microsoft 365 experience.
Absolutely.
So
you can really tell that the teams are working together.
And they're sharing code. They're sharing. There's a thing called the Office Fabric UI. And that's a big thing for not only for us to use, but to even pass on to
ISVs
and ISVs. So that if you really want it to look and feel like Office and not feel like you're navigating between products, but it's one service. That's our end goal for the end user experience.
That's really going to help end users adopting that. If things look familiar, it's much easier to start using it. So great stuff. We're gonna end it. Very great that you were capable of reserving some time to be here for this interview. Thanks for obviously having a great time here at the SharePoint Conference. I've seen you around hustling with your camera like this and the one that you carry around that's sort of pivoting. Thank you for supporting the conference, the community, and all that good stuff. And thanks everybody for your time listening today. Any questions for him? Any questions for me? We're pretty available. Yes, just
Don't
post
hesitate.
comments. We are happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Bye.